When I was growing up in our young people's songbook, there was this song which I could never sing. I never knew the tune to it, and I only found the tune last night on YouTube. It was an Isaac Watts song. It was the Ten Commandments in short rhyme for kids. So that's how I learned the Ten Commandments. I didn't learn the Exodus version. I didn't learn the Deuteronomy version. I learned the version that is contained in this song. I made up my own tune to it because I wanted to sing it. What shall we do with the drunken sailor? That's the tune I used. Because I needed it to work and I didn't know the tune. Here's how it would begin. Thou shalt have no more gods but me, before no idol bow thy knee. Take not the name of God in vain, nor dare the Sabbath day profane. Give both thy parents honor due, take heed that thou no murder do. Abstain from words and deeds unclean, nor steal though thou art poor and mean. Nor make a willful lie, nor love it. What is thy neighbor's dare not covet. That's the wrong tune, but that's the tune I made up. Isaac Watts was one of the great writers, great poets and songwriters. And if you look through the Salvation Army songbook, it used to be like 100 songs by Isaac Watts, easily. So I was very familiar with all the Isaac Watts songs, and I tried to figure out. I told you I pretended to be an amateur hymnologist from young, studying the poetry. But anyway, that one helped me to get through the Ten Commandments, and I thought I would share it with you. But I also wanted to get an idea of, for each commandment, is there a word you can hang it on? This is the main idea in that particular commandment. So I tried to, in the first column, you'll see me my attempt to identify key concepts in the commandment. I may have missed it. I'm going to bet that you might have come up with a different word. On the right-hand side, I was going to try and figure out if we have a conversation, if there are other concepts that come up that I should have noted. I thought that the first commandment dealt with exclusivity. Based on the words, thou shalt have no more gods but me, God is saying, in this marriage, this is a monogamous relationship. You can't look at other people, you look at me. It's all about worshiping and worshiping me. No more gods except. The but means except. You will have no, I didn't even know why more. More is interesting. No gods but me. And I call that the exclusivity of the relationship. Exclude all others and worship me alone. And when Jesus was being tempted by the devil, he said to the devil, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. So he was saying this exclusive relationship is important. I want to go to the second command. In my version, before no idol, bow thy knee. If you look at the Exodus chapter 20 version, you will see that this is not actually one sentence. It is probably the longest exposition of the commandment. That and the fourth commandment about the Sabbath. So to summarize it in 8 syllables is probably not doing justice to it. So the summary concept I say there is idolatry. And we have to get our mind around what idolatry actually is. In many religions, they made idols. I could just fast forward to golden calf and say enough said. When Moses went up on the mountain and he was taking too long, the people murmured against him, and they told his brother, we need something to worship. They got all the jewelry that they pilfered was offered to them by the Egyptians, and they made an idol, a golden calf, for them to worship. Because in Egypt, that's what people did. They worshipped stuff, idols. And other nations also worship idols. So they said, hey, Moses is gone. He's not coming back. They're watching the clock saying, okay, where's Moses? 40 days? He's probably not coming back. Let's make an idol. And they made this idol. Then Moses appears. What have you done? I rewatched the Ten Commandments a couple of days ago. Charlton Heston throws down the commands at the Golden Island, a big ball of fire. I love that. That's like the last minute of the movie. Nice and dramatic. Idolatry. When you think of idolatry, I'm going to go directly and ask, do you have any idols in your life? Don't say no, because we all have idols. The question is, do we worship them? And I'm being a little dramatic to say that our job and our family and our stuff and our bank account, all idols. And the question is, do we turn our attention to them? Just as the people saw the other nations worshiping idols, the idols existed. You can choose not to worship the idol. And that's what God is saying. You will see idols all around you. You will see other nations with their idols. And you will even have some of your own idols. Just don't worship them. So I'm backing off not to make an idol something that is up there to be worshipped, but just a something. of something else in your life. Usually an idol is man-made, hand-formed. So something that you have made in your life. And I think if we are harsh with ourselves, we are more likely to see the fault there, Brutus, lies in us. This is not in our stars. We will then recognize that there are things in our life that need attention. And then we ask that question, is this idol being worshipped? One of the songs in our book says, I found a friend in Jesus, he's everything to me. One of the verses says, he all my griefs have taken and all my sorrows bore. In temptation, he's my strong and mighty tower. I've all for him forsaken. I've all my idols torn from my heart, and now he keeps me by his power. I've all my idols torn from my heart, and now he keeps me. There are idols in our lives, and the question is, do we allow those idols to get some worthship? It has to be something that we value. So this is worthy of my attention. So I want you to think about the things in your life that are worthy of your attention. Usually it's like a hobby or something that you have there set aside. You cherish this thing. You go play with this little toy or whatever. It's an idol. The question is, do you worship it? Do you give it so much attention that you take time that you could be giving to God and you focus on this thing? For many people, the television is an idol. Or nowadays, YouTube. I'm guilty. The idol takes your time and attention away from him that is most worthy. So as you look at that 24 hours, how much time are you giving to this thing? Or as you look at your week, how much attention is this thing getting? Now, I'm not saying to get rid of your toys, but I'm saying ask yourself the question, is it getting so much of my attention that that attention could be used more for God's glory? Idols. You can jump in at any point if you want to. Commandment number 3. I call this the most misunderstood commandment. Take not the name of God in vain. And most people think of this and they think of using profane language. But that's not what it's about at all. Do you think that when Moses brought the children of Israel out of Egypt and a few days later he is telling them, here's what God has said, that he is telling them to watch their language? It is about the name. The name. Remember earlier he had asked God, what should I tell the people is the name? What is your name? And God told him the name. And I said the Jews don't even mention it. The name. What does he mean when he says don't take the name of God in vain? I'm going to read a few verses from Leviticus to give you a sense of where that is going. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 21. God says, do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, for you must not profane my name. Don't sacrifice your children, because in doing so you're profaning my name. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19, verse 12. Do not swear falsely by my name. Do not say, yeah, I promise you by the name of that I will not do this or I will do this. Do not use my name falsely in making promises, because you profane my name. I am the Lord your God. Remember the Pharisees? How they would add another layer of protection around the law to prevent them from breaking the law? So my analogy is if the speed limit is 35, they will drive at 25. They'll say the law says don't drive at 25, because if you don't exceed 25, you can't exceed 35. 10 over? You will not do it. So they put a layer of protection around the law. The same thing they do with the name. They don't call it. They say the name, or Adonai, to avoid calling the name. They don't want to profane the name. I think if you got what I just said, then you'll get a clear sense of what that commandment is about. Do not profane my name. And if they don't call the name, then they can't profane the name. Yes?
What's the definition of profane?
Excellent question. Profane. To treat something that is holy with disrespect or irreverence. To desecrate, to defile, or to treat sacrilegiously. Do not profane my name. So, in offering your children to idols, he said, you are profaning my name. In swearing falsely, using my name, you are profaning my name. I will set my face against those who sacrifice their children to Molech. They defile my sanctuary and profane my holy name. They must be holy to their God and must not profane the name of their God. They present food offerings to the Lord, the food of their God. They must present it in a holy manner, for they are to be holy. Tell Aaron and his sons to treat the name with respect. To treat with respect the sacred offerings the Israelites are consecrating, so that they will not profane my holy name. Leviticus 22, verse 32. Do not profane my holy name, for I must be acknowledged as holy by the Israelites. I am the Lord who made you holy. So the idea is that the name is holy. Don't use the name in any way that would desecrate the name or disrespect the name or be irreverent or defile the name or be sacrilegious. It is more than profanity in the 21st century idea of profanity. It is about how you respect and revere the name, which is why, as I said, the Jews do not even mention the name. If the speed limit is 35 and you drive at 25, you will not break the law. Respect the name. So blasphemy is what I call that. But it's more than blasphemy in a sense. God wasn't thinking about people swearing in a contemporary sense. He was thinking about revering the name that was not called. So don't use the name because you swear by something higher than you in court. The evidence I shall give, so help me God. You swear by something higher than you. And if you swear by God, you're swearing by the highest level of authority. So if you swear and you lie, that's the swearing that we talk about. Not swearing using profane language, bad language, but swearing, making an oath, and calling on the name of God as a signatory, a stamp of approval that what you're saying is true. And then you lie. The punishment for profaning the name of God, very quickly. Leviticus chapter 24. The son of the Israelite woman blasphemed the name. So they brought him to Moses. And Moses says, anyone who blasphemes the name shall be put to death. The entire assembly must stone him. When you blaspheme the name, you are to be put to death. So it's not about loose language. I dare say, sometimes we think of God in a casual way. But if we revere him the way he ought to be revered, we would not blaspheme, because we're going to say, what is sacred will not be desecrated. And I will not participate in any desecration, which means we need to be careful about how we are living our lives, how we are communicating with and about God to make sure that we do not desecrate or blaspheme his name. Commandment number 4, I want to say it's kind of self-evident, but maybe not, because times have changed. And some of us are old enough to know when the stores were closed and you went to church several times on a Sunday. And even if you didn't go to church, you were very quiet and you thought about God. If you couldn't make it to church, you dedicated that time and that space to God. Unless you were in an essential services where it was mandated that you work, then it was a day of rest. But it's not just rest. It is rest and worship, which is why we assemble and we offer God an offering of praise and thanksgiving and whatever other offerings we bring, including physical offerings. But it was set aside, and it's supposed to be set aside for this purpose, once every 7 days. But there's also the Sabbath once every 7 years. And the promise he was offering here was not about what was happening in year 1 of the Exodus. It was looking forward to year 40 when they crossed into that land and they claimed the land, because it was a land grant promise too. You will not desecrate the land, and you will let the land stay idle every 7 years. That was the Sabbath. And then 7 Sabbaths, the year of Jubilee, another great sabbatical. So there was a lot going on there that we cannot identify with because we live in a contemporary world where we don't take Sabbaths. And that's a conversation I don't want to stir right now. Should we rest on Saturday and worship on Sunday, the first day of the week versus the 7th day? I don't want to open that can of worms because there are many arguments that can be had about that. But the idea of Sabbath, it is about resting from our work. That's what the elaboration says. But not resting to rest, resting to focus on God. Nature abhors a vacuum. So you don't just pull work out and put nothing there. You replace the work with worship. And that is the idea that was being promulgated there. I could probably stop there and then go into more detailed study on those 4. Number 5 is about honoring your parents. And that gets a little dicey. One of the questions I have on the handout relate to, if your parents have not exactly done right by you, what does that honor look like? And if you don't know them because you were born and they were gone in some way, do you honor the biological parent or the adoptive parent or the person who raised you in lieu of a parent? And then the next 5 relate to relations to people on the lateral level. So in my version of things, don't murder. I love what Jesus did with that. If you're angry with your brother, Jesus raised the bar really, really high. You're thinking, oh, I haven't killed anybody. No. Did you get angry with anybody? That's murder in Jesus' eyes. Man, I'm guilty. Have you gotten angry with anyone in the past week or month? Jesus is saying, that's what the commandment is speaking to. So you have a list of don'ts, but you have to raise it from do not do to here's what you do instead. So don't work on the Sabbath. What you do instead is worship. Don't Get angry instead, love. He told one of the guys, love your neighbor as yourself. And then in the Sermon on the Mount, what did he say? Love your enemies. Don't just love your neighbor, love your enemies. So he's raising the bar really, really, really high. Which means on our own it's impossible to meet the standard. I don't know. For me, it's impossible. Without his help and without that covering of grace, there's no way I could make that standard. I'm not going to pretend that I don't murder anyone, because Jesus said, you see murder, but I see anger. And anger is the appropriate replacement for murder. The next one in the Bible focuses on adultery. And you have thoughts about what adultery is. In Watts' little song, it says, abstain from words and deeds unclean. So because it's written for children, adultery is not the appropriate word. So he replaces it with words and deeds unclean. But how does Jesus even approach that subject? He says, if you look at somebody of the other gender and you have thoughts, that's adultery. That's the high standard. So a magazine or television show or something, a billboard, and you're looking and you're thinking. As long as you're thinking, in Jesus' eyes, that's adultery. Who can abide by these standards? They're so high. Keep going. Nor steal, guilty. Because I'm sure that this pen was issued by my work, and I have it here in my possession. And there are lots of pens that my work issues that end up at my house. And I keep thinking, use the ones at the house. Don't go take another one just because it's there. Office supplies. I once watched a guy take a whole ream of paper and stick it in his bag. He says, I'm doing the school work, so I'm taking the paper home. Ouch, I wouldn't dare do that, but nor steal. But I'm sure that Jesus has another standard for that too. And it's not taking stuff, it is more than that. I haven't researched that one. Number 9, false witness. That sounds like in a court or in a trial. You're saying, oh yeah, he did it. I know he did it, when you are actually lying. So that was the absolute standard that was offered. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. What Watts says in his version is, don't make a willful lie and enjoy making that lie. Nor make a willful lie nor love it. If somebody asks me why I have this pen at my church, here's what I'm going to say. I'm conniving the willful lie about why I don't buy a separate pen for church and keep the one for work at work. I'm saying that the standard is high, and we cannot actually maintain this without God's help. The last one says, it is a longer one. In the Exodus version, it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, which is interesting because they didn't have houses. They were just out of the Egyptian enslavement, and they're at the mountain. So don't covet your neighbor's house. It's looking forward. In the Deuteronomy version, 40 years later, it starts with, do not covet your neighbor's wife. If you grew up Catholic, you know that the coveting is actually commands 9 and 10. The Catholics split number 9 because they don't have number 2. Number 2 is idolatry. Or what I call idolatry. Bowing to any idol. So that does not appear in the Catholic version of the 10 Commandments. You probably know that if you were raised Catholic. I'm not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole right now, so we can talk about that later. But they split number 10 into 9 and 10. Coveting your neighbor's wife, coveting your neighbor's stuff. As Protestants, we put it all together, and we say, what is your neighbor's do not covet? And how do you even define coveting? If you desire something somebody else has, you're messing with fire. You're thinking, you know what, I admire that. So you can admire, but don't think thoughts of, how can I get? My grandmother used to say, be contented with what you have, little be it or much. How to find contentment when other people have. And you think that God is not just because, why is it that I don't have and this person has? But when you have 2 million people fresh out of slavery in Egypt, standing in the dust at the foot of Mount Sinai, it is not what we are thinking in 2018. However, we still have to think through it and ask, how does this Decalogue apply to us today? And it's mentioned 3 times at least in the original versions, but then it's mentioned in summary form. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, all your strength, all your mind. And what on earth does that mean anyway? All your heart, soul, strength, and mind. How do you do that? And then love your neighbor, edit by love your enemy. The same way you love yourself. Impossible standards. All right, let's look at the questions for a couple of minutes here. The Israelites worshipped other gods. And we know that a few days later they're going to be building a golden calf. We know on many occasions they will turn to the gods that the others were worshiping, including Asherah poles, including Baals, they're going to give in to the temptation of what they see around them. Because their God is not one they could see with their eyes, the temptation is out of sight, out of mind. We can't see him, therefore maybe he is not there. And also, the idea that if you can't see him and you pray and you ask a request and the answer doesn't come, or the wing I should say, that maybe God is not hearing. So there are lots of issues why even faithful Christians would sometimes wonder if God is hearing their prayers. What is the formula for getting your prayer answered in the way that you want it answered? That's a danger. We already figure out what answer we want. A few years ago, a young lady was sitting in our class, and she said, God is like Santa Claus. You ask him for stuff, and he gives it to you. And it took me a long time to get over that. Because he answers differently than we expect. And many of us were taught to pray, your will be done, which has its own set of issues, because there are times when Jesus says, ask and it shall be given to you, seek and you shall find. You don't get because you don't ask. So it's not even 100% transparent how to do that. But I say you got to ask, believing, and at the end of that request, say, Lord, if it's your will. And hope that that is adequate enough, because I remember Mark a few weeks ago. Would it contravene some eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Very funny. You want to say, well, Lord, can I get a little bit more? Why not? Would it upset some eternal plan if I had a little bit more? So we get that idea that, is God just? Is God fair? Why is God allowing me to go through stuff that is unpleasant? The Apostle Paul, asking God on several occasions to remove a thorn, which thankfully is not told to us. 3 times he said he asked the Lord to remove it. How did God respond? My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in your weakness. And Paul says, therefore, I will delight in weakness. For when I am weak, then am I strong. So we have to find a way to take the situation that looks negative and let God have his way with the circumstances. This is a very hard lesson, by the way. Because when you are going through some stuff and you want God to show up right now and make it right because he can, and the answer doesn't come, you become like the Israelites. Okay, maybe it's time to build a golden calf. You turn to your idol. So what you say is, Lord, I want you to answer this prayer, but if you don't answer it, I'm going to fix it myself. And I don't have a good answer for that. Because sometimes I fix problems myself too. Because I'm waiting for the Lord to answer it quickly. This is the most difficult part of my own Christian walk. Anticipating when God will intervene and give the answer that you want at the time you want. 10 Commandments. Very important. Yes, it served its time thousands of years ago, and it was bookending a 40-year wandering, twice occurring in Exodus and Deuteronomy. But it fast forwards because when Jesus is asked about the great commandments, he says you got to love the Lord. And very quickly, I'll tell you, there are 3 situations where Jesus is asked this question. On 2 occasions, he's asked, which is the greatest commandment? And then the other occasions where someone says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Luke 18:18. The rich young ruler. What must I do? What did Jesus say? Get rid of your stuff and come follow me. Really? The Bible says he went away grieved because he had great possessions. So sometimes the Lord asks things of us that are nigh impossible for us to deliver on. And sometimes it's best not to ask. Because if you hear back and ask, I can't do this. Lord, thou art questioned and lovest thou me. Let us re-examine our relationship with God. And ask that question, how can I better serve you? And be careful what you ask and make sure you don't desecrate the name of the Lord by swearing an oath or by thinking about God in some way that is inappropriate. How do you approach God? I'll have the pastors help you with that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this ministry and this time we spent together. We pray that you will open our hearts and our understanding so that we will desire that closer walk with you. So help us in our living to live more near to you and to desire to do the things that please you. Open the eyes of our understanding and draw us closer to you even now. In Jesus' name, amen.